I was 17 the night I realized my parents wouldn't come for me. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room ceiling flickered above me, buzzing like a dying insect. I was lying on a gurney with an IV taped clumsily to my arm, a neck brace holding me in place, blood dried in my hair. Everything smelled like antiseptic and copper. I'd been in a car accident, driver ran a red light, clipped the side of my friend Natalie's car where I was sitting passenger. They said if I hadn't turned my head the way I did, my neck would have snapped on impact. I could barely move. Every breath made my ribs scream. The first thing I did when I regained consciousness was ask the nurse to hand me my phone. The second thing I did was call my parents. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I sent a text, in hospital. Car accident. Please come now. My hands were shaking so badly I hit send before I could type more. 10 minutes passed. 20. Still nothing. Natalie's mom was already in the room, holding her hand and crying. She asked if I wanted her to call my parents for me. I nodded, humiliated. She tried. Voicemail. By the time the ER doctor came back with the scans, I'd already called my mom 8 times and my dad 4. I was starting to think they were asleep or at a movie or something. Something innocent. I was wrong. At exactly 9:46 p.m., my mom finally called me back. Her voice was tight, annoyed. What is going on, Claire? Why are you blowing up our phones? You know how Mark gets when he's upset. I blinked. I was in a car accident. I'm in the hospital. Dead silence for a beat. Then, are you seriously hurt? They're keeping me overnight for observation. My head hit the window. They think I might have a concussion, and I can't move my neck right now. She let out an exaggerated breath. So you're not dying? What? No, but... Claire, your brother is having a full-blown episode. He got a traffic ticket. He thinks the cops are targeting him. He's pacing the house like a maniac. We had to hide the knives again. I'm sorry, but this is just really bad timing. He needs us right now. I couldn't speak. My jaw was literally hanging open. She added, can they discharge you in the morning? Maybe we can come get you then. Click. I stared at the phone. The call had ended. She hung up on me. Natalie's mom was still in the room, but I didn't even care anymore. I cried. Quietly at first, then ugly. I wanted to scream. I was 17, bruised and scared and alone, and my parents, my own parents, couldn't be bothered to come see me because Mark was having a meltdown over a $200 ticket. That's when I knew. I was not the child they prioritized. My brother Mark is 2 years older than me. Growing up, I was trained to walk on eggshells around him. He had sensitivities, my mom always said. Big feelings. Couldn't handle pressure. Couldn't take criticism. Couldn't share. Couldn't be told no. So everything revolved around him. At dinner, if he didn't like the food, we all went hungry until something else was made. On holidays, if the noise was too much, we had to turn off the music and speak in whispers. Every school meeting, every parent-teacher night, every family photo, Mark was the main character. I was the afterthought. When I was 10, I had to quit violin because the sound bothered Mark. When I got straight A's in 8th grade, they barely looked up from the table when I told them. But when Mark passed one math test after failing 3, they threw him a pizza party. By high school, I had accepted it. But that night in the hospital cemented it in a way I couldn't ignore. I got discharged the next morning. Alone. The hospital social worker offered to call my parents again, but I told her not to bother. I didn't want to see them. I texted a neighbor instead, a retired guy named Jim who lived 2 houses down and had always been weirdly kind to me. He showed up in a beat-up truck with coffee and a muffin and didn't ask questions. When we pulled into my driveway, the front window curtain twitched. I saw Mom peeking out. Dad followed. They didn't come out to help me inside. I limped to the front door on my own, dragging my bag behind me. Inside, Mark was on the couch, shirtless, playing video games like nothing had happened. There was a fresh pizza box on the coffee table. He glanced at me, then said, "Nice neck brace." My parents hovered by the kitchen. Dad broke the silence. "Claire, we're really sorry about last night. It was just not a good time." "Not a good time?" I repeated, my voice hollow. Mom stepped forward. "We were under a lot of stress. You sounded fine. We didn't think it was that serious." I stared at them. I could have died. "And you were more worried about a traffic ticket." Mark laughed. Drama queen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the whole room apart. But I didn't. I just walked past them, up the stairs, and locked my bedroom door. That was the beginning of the shift. Over the next few months, I pulled away from them. I stopped eating dinner at the table. Stopped sharing things about school. I got a part-time job at a bookstore just so I could stay out of the house longer. They noticed, and they didn't like it. You've been distant, Mom said one night, knocking on my door. I'm fine. Claire, we're a family. Sure we are. I heard her sigh, then footsteps retreating. The final straw came during college applications. I got into 2 really good schools, both out of state. I was so excited I couldn't sleep. When I told my parents, Mom blinked at me and said, "But we thought you'd stay local. Mark still needs support." Dad nodded. "We assumed you'd commute. Save money. Help out at home." "I'm not staying," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to get out." Mark snorted. "Whatever. You'll be back in a semester." I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt pity. And something colder. A seed of rage that had been growing in my gut for years. They didn't know it yet, but I was done playing the background character in my own life. And one day soon, they'd see what that cost them. College was the first time I ever felt air in my lungs. I got out. I made it. Even though my parents refused to help with tuition, said it was selfish to expect support when Mark was struggling financially, I pieced together scholarships, grants, and student loans. I moved into a tiny dorm room on a campus 6 hours away. It was nothing special, drab walls, flickering light in the hallway, but to me, it felt like freedom. No Mark. No parents telling me he couldn't help it. No more being the emergency backup adult in a house built on emotional blackmail. I threw myself into everything. Class, campus jobs, volunteering. I even made friends. Real ones. People who laughed when I spoke, who asked about me, not because I was Mark's sister, but because they cared. I called home less and less. At first, they noticed. Mom texted things like, "Mark is asking about you. He misses you. Are you upset with us? You're being really cold. Can you come home this weekend? Mark's therapist thinks a visit from you would help." I didn't respond. Or I kept it short. Eventually, they stopped trying. It should have felt like revenge. Like justice. But it didn't. Not really. Because deep down, I still craved something that made no sense after everything they'd done. I wanted them to want me back. To realize what they'd lost. That didn't happen. Not yet. But something else did. Spring semester of my sophomore year, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mom. Crying. "Claire," she gasped, "it's Mark. He's missing." I sat up so fast my phone almost flew out of my hand. "Missing? What do you mean?" "He left the house last night and didn't come back. We thought he was cooling off, but he's not answering his phone. It's been 16 hours. Did you call the police?" "Yes, of course. But they think he's just blowing off steam. You know how he gets. But this time feels different. He emptied out his savings. Took the car. He left a note." "A note?" Her voice cracked. It said, "I'm not your responsibility anymore." I didn't say anything. My throat felt tight. "I know we haven't talked much," she said carefully. "But you're still his sister. If there's anything you know, anything you think might help us find him, Al." "I don't," I said flatly. "He doesn't talk to me. Remember?" She sniffled. "Claire, please. We're scared." I hung up without another word. And I should have felt nothing. But I didn't. I felt the kind of dread that crawls under your skin and settles in your bones. Because I did know something. Not a detail, not a plan, but a feeling. A shadow. 2 weeks before Mark vanished, he sent me a message out of the blue. A simple one. "You were right. About everything." I hadn't responded. I thought it was bait. Or guilt-tripping. Now, it echoed in my head like a scream underwater. They found the car 3 days later, abandoned in a strip mall parking lot 2 counties over. Inside were empty Red Bull cans, a half-eaten sub, and Mark's hoodie folded neatly on the back seat. No sign of Mark. The investigation stalled. My parents fell apart. My dad stopped going to work. My mom started calling me again, now constantly. Her voice was always cracked and brittle, like dried leaves. "Please come home. Just for a weekend." I resisted. For months. Then, one day in July, I gave in. I told myself it was curiosity. Closure. But I think part of me wanted to see it. The wreckage. The consequences of years spent pouring water into a bucket with only one hole. When I stepped into the house again, I almost didn't recognize it. Photos of Mark were everywhere. Candles. Notes. Flyers. It felt like a shrine. They didn't hug me. They didn't even greet me properly. They just stared at me like I was a ghost. "Thank you for coming," Mom said stiffly. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her hair thinner than I remembered. "We're trying to hold on to hope," Dad added. But it's been 6 months, and he trailed off. Mark had always been the sun in this family. And now that sun had burned out. The warmth was gone. All that was left was gravity, pulling everything inward, tight and cold. I stayed one night. That was all I could stomach. Before I left, I wandered into Mark's old room. Nothing had been touched. Posters still up. Sneakers by the bed. Laptop open on the desk. I sat down, glanced at the screen. The browser was open to an anonymous forum. One thread was still highlighted. I clicked. It was a post. Short. Dated 3 days before he vanished. What do you do when you realize the person you've become is someone your own sister wouldn't cry for? There were no replies. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. Back at school, I tried to bury it. The guilt. The confusion. But I couldn't. I knew Mark was troubled. Manipulative, even. But he was also my brother. And for a moment, just one moment, I felt like I'd let him disappear because I wanted him to. And then, 2 months later, something happened that shattered everything I thought I knew. I got a letter. No return address. Just my name in slanted handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No greeting. Just one sentence. They'll never tell you the truth. That's it. No signature. Nothing else. I stared at it for hours. Because I recognized the handwriting. It was Mark's. He wasn't missing. He was hiding. And someone, maybe both of my parents, knew. I couldn't sleep for days after the letter arrived. I kept rereading that one line. They'll never tell you the truth. Over and over, until the words started to lose meaning. Until I questioned if I'd imagined them. But I hadn't. It was real. Mark was alive. Somewhere. And if what he wrote was true, they knew. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Not my friends. Not my roommate. Not even the campus therapist I saw occasionally. I didn't want it twisted into some trauma response or denial spiral. I knew what I'd read. I knew my brother's handwriting better than anyone. That sharp lean to the left, the long tail on his why, the habit of skipping punctuation. He was alive, and my parents were lying. I gave it a week. Then I called them. Mom picked up on the third ring. I got a letter, I said calmly. Her voice caught. What kind of letter? You know what kind. Mark's alive. He wrote me. There was silence. Then, Claire, don't do this. Don't what? Confront you with something you've been hiding for months. She didn't answer. I want the truth. And if you don't tell me, I swear I'll show this to the police. I'll drag this whole family through the mud. I wasn't bluffing. I didn't even care if it turned out to be fake. I needed the dam to break. She exhaled, long and shaky. Come home, she whispered. Please. I'll tell you everything. But only in person. I drove down that weekend with the letter in my backpack and a recorder app loaded on my phone. I needed evidence. Not just for myself. I didn't trust a word that came out of her mouth anymore. The house was darker than I remembered. The lights dimmed, the shades drawn, as if they were afraid to be seen. Mom met me at the door. She looked older, paler, like guilt had aged her 5 years and 6 months. Dad was already sitting at the dining table, a manila folder in front of him. They didn't offer me food, or tea, or even a seat. They just stood there, like they were about to confess to a crime. Because they were. It started in March, Mom said. Mark had a breakdown. Worse than usual. He said he couldn't breathe in this house anymore. That we'd ruined him. Dad added. He said he couldn't take the weight of being the one who always needed help. That he hated the way we pitted him. My stomach churned. So he faked his disappearance? No, Mom said quietly. We did. I stared at her. What? She stepped back. Rubbed her arms like she was cold. He begged us to let him go. To disappear. To start over. He said he didn't want to die, but he wanted his life as he knew it to end. We were terrified, Dad said. He's our son, but he said he'd do it with or without us. So we helped him. My throat went dry. Helped him how? The manila folder slid across the table. Inside were documents. A notarized name change request. A lease in a city I didn't recognize. A prepaid phone contract under a different name. They hadn't just let him go. They'd funded it. They'd planned it. They'd chosen it, over me. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely audible. Mom looked at me like I was a child again. Because you already hated him. We didn't want to make it worse. I didn't hate him, I snapped. I hated how you enabled him. How you made me invisible to keep him from cracking. You wouldn't have understood, Dad said. You've never had big emotions like Mark. I laughed. Out loud. Bitter and sharp. You mean I didn't throw tantrums? I didn't punch walls. I didn't drain your bank account or threaten to run away unless you caved. Their silence was all the answer I needed. They still didn't get it. They never would. I left that night. Drove straight back to school without sleeping. The rage kept me awake. The betrayal made it easy. I wanted to confront Mark. To ask why he wrote me. Why he broke the wall of silence just to send a cryptic note. But I didn't have a return address. I didn't have a phone number. All I had was a city name from the lease document, Springfield. There were dozens of Springfields across the country, and the state name had been blacked out with Sharpie. But someone had slipped. A post-it note was stuck to the back of one of the pages. It read, Unit 3B pay utilities separate. That was enough. I became obsessed. Every night after classes, I searched listings, apartments, leases, tenant forums. It took weeks, but I found it. Springfield, Missouri. A listing for a one-bedroom apartment, Unit 3B, where the utilities were paid separately. It matched the lease terms. The name on the lease wasn't Mark's, of course. But I knew. I booked a bus ticket. It was pouring rain when I got there. A gray, crumbling building on the edge of town, just shy of the train tracks. I stood outside Unit 3B for 10 full minutes, soaked to the skin, heart jackhammering. Then I knocked. The door opened a crack. And there he was. Mark. Thinner. Bearded. Eyes sunken. But it was him. He stared at me like I was a ghost. I knew you'd figure it out, he said. I shoved the letter into his chest. Why did you send this? He took it. Looked down. Smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Because I needed to know if you still cared enough to come. I wanted to scream. To hit him. To ask why he put me through this. But instead, I said, I care. But I don't forgive you. He nodded. I don't forgive myself either. Then he opened the door wider. And that's when I saw what was behind him. A baby's playpen. A diaper bag. A woman's coat hanging on the rack. Mark wasn't alone. He had a new life. And a secret he still hadn't told me. I couldn't breathe. For a second, the whole world narrowed to that one detail, the tiny pair of baby shoes by the door. Mark was talking, saying something about coffee or explaining the weather or trying to make this look casual, but I couldn't hear any of it. All I could see were the remnants of a life I hadn't known existed. A life he built while everyone mourned him. While I screamed in silence, I stepped inside. The apartment was small but warm. Lived in. Cozy. There were toys on the carpet, a bottle drying by the sink, and a pink onesie draped over the back of the couch. It smelled like baby powder and cinnamon toast. Whose child is this? I asked. Mark didn't flinch. Mine. The answer hit me like a freight train. Since when? About 6 months after I left. You have a daughter. He nodded. Her name's Lily. I blinked, hard. My mind raced through the timeline. You got someone pregnant while you were hiding? Or was this the reason you disappeared? He hesitated. That split-second pause gave him away. She was already pregnant when you left. He didn't speak. I stepped back. You didn't disappear because of a breakdown. You disappeared because you were going to be a dad. It's more complicated than that, he said quickly. I was falling apart. I didn't think I could handle it. I didn't want to be like our parents, raising a kid in a house where everything's eggshells and guilt and noise. I wanted to protect her from all that. And you thought vanishing was the answer? I didn't vanish, he snapped. I escaped. He realized how loud he got. He glanced toward the bedroom, suddenly panicked. A soft voice called out, Mark. A woman emerged, holding a baby with fuzzy brown hair and sleepy eyes. She stopped when she saw me. This is my sister, he said. Claire. The woman smiled gently. Hi, Claire. I'm Sadie. I couldn't move. My hands were shaking. The baby nestled into her shoulder. Mark reached for her instinctively, and the baby reached back. I felt something crack inside me. Something bitter and wet. He had love now. Real love. A family. After all the chaos he caused, after stealing our parents' attention, after abandoning me in a hospital bed, after faking his own disappearance, he got to reinvent himself. And I got left with the mess. I stepped back toward the door. Claire, wait, he said. I sent you that letter because I wanted you to know. I wanted someone to know I didn't just disappear to hurt you. I was trying to break the cycle. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. Break the cycle? You became it. He looked down. I don't want anything from you, I said. Not an apology. Not a relationship. But I want you to understand this. When I was 17 and scared and bleeding in a hospital bed, you weren't there. Our parents weren't there. I called and begged. And you were having a meltdown about a traffic ticket. Sadie's eyes widened. Mark froze. That was the moment I realized I didn't have a family. Not really. Just a stage where everyone played the same parts. You, the disaster. Mom and Dad, the handlers. And me, the understudy no one clapped for. He whispered, I remember that night. Do you? I said coldly. Because it changed me. And I don't know if I'll ever change back. He reached out, but I stepped away. I hope you're a good father, I said, staring at the baby. She deserves better than we had. I left without waiting for an answer. Back on campus, I didn't tell anyone where I'd been. I shoved the whole weekend into a box and buried it deep. But it didn't stay buried. Because a month later, my parents showed up. Unannounced. I came back from class to find them sitting on the bench outside my dorm building. Mom stood up. We know you found him. I didn't answer. Dad looked tired. You were right. About everything. I usually am, I muttered. We want to see him, Mom said. And our granddaughter. I blinked. You don't get to decide that. We helped him, Claire, she snapped. We sacrificed. No, I cut in. You sacrificed me. She opened her mouth to argue. I raised my hand. You always said Mark needed more support, more patience, more money. But when I was bleeding in that ER, scared and alone, I got a voicemail. And now? You want me to be the bridge back to the son you already chose over me. They didn't speak. You think I'll give you his address? I said. Help you crash into the new life he's building just so you can start the cycle all over again? Mom's voice broke. We just want to see the baby. I looked at them both, finally calm. I hope you do someday. But that's between Mark and you, not me. I turned and walked into the building. This time, I didn't look back. That winter, I got another letter. From Mark. No envelope. Just folded paper, slipped under my door. It read. She said her first word yesterday. It was light. I cried. You were right. I became everything I hated. But I'm trying. Thank you for waking me up. There was no apology. But maybe that was the apology. I didn't reply. But I kept the letter. Not because I forgave him, but because it reminded me I had survived. I wasn't the forgotten one anymore. I was free.